Hello, Maria and Carl. Greetings from Pennsylvania. Good morning, Justin, and good afternoon to both of you.
Good morning.
Yes, again, sincere appreciation to you for your time and just for your willingness to share your expertise and your insight into the Auböck family legacy and its presence here in the United States and especially Pennsylvania. So thank you. So I think Justin will get us started, and we're looking forward to spending the next hour together in this conversation.
Maria and Carl, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. And I look forward to hearing not only stories about your family, but also stories about Fallingwater, which are, of course, particularly fascinating to me. But I'll go ahead and open up with a fairly general question for both of you. Maria and Carl, you're fourth generation of your family, and you're currently running the Vienna-based family workshop founded by Karl Heinrich Auböck in the 1800s, which was founded to produce Viennese bronzes. For those that are a bit unfamiliar with the family legacy and with the workshop, can each of you talk briefly about how you came into the role that you have with the workshop, and also a bit about your careers and how that might fold into your roles within the family workshop?
So I am the older sister, so I get started.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer your questions. In fact, it was homemade to be part of the team. You know, this family workshop had intended from grandfather's time to work up collections, to work season-wide. So we learned even in childhood that we have to consider time and management and get ahead and to design, and most of all, to create new ideas for good living, for the life of people. Design is forthcoming an issue to make social standards better. So myself, I studied architecture besides helping along in the workshop, and turned into landscape architect as I thought this is the issue I'm interested in. My brother, he will explain how he did get along, but this is how we team up.
Well, in my case, it was a bit different because my parents thought that in summertime it should be appropriate that I will work in the workshop from age 12 beginning. And there were these guys who worked in the workshop at that time, and it was very different to come in contact with these specialists, I want to say, because they are not workers like ordinary workers, but they were specialists in metal techniques. And I was a kid, more or less, and not accustomed to their language too. So it was really something very new to me to work in the workshop amidst grown-up people who were real masters in their trade. And I did starting off grinding and filing the cast. Our workshop specializes in the techniques that are connected with the casting of metal. And so I heard their stories, and they asked me. I did not know how to answer them, but 2 or 3 years in summertime, a few weeks, I spent here to learn the basic techniques of working brass. Later on, I also studied architecture, and together with Maria, we attended also professional school for the trade of the girdler, which shop is a girdler workshop. Girdler means this is the trade of producing chandeliers, more or less. The name comes from mostly brass buckles of shoes and belts, which were made from brass in the 18th century. But later on, they specialized in producing chandeliers. And our street here in the Bernhardgasse was specialized on the metalwork on the one side of the street, more or less, and on the other side of the street, they worked the crystals for the chandeliers. 30 years ago, we made the first Auböck exhibition, and we tried to find traces where is the spirit come, where does the spirit come from, where do the ideas derive from. So this is 30 years ago, and after these 30 years, to 2024, we learned a lot more about the family, and Maria, especially Maria, worked a lot about the letters she received from Tante Valerie to find out more about the internal spirit of the family.
Sure, and this kind of ties into where you were going, both of you, Carl and Maria. I mean, to be surrounded by all of that environment, all of that creativity, all of that art, it had to have changed the way you look at the world, the way you see things around you. Clearly had to have had an influence in where you went, both with your careers. Can you all talk just kind of briefly about how growing up as an Aubock kind of changed the way you see things around you?
Well, in my case, I think it was the biggest and most important influence was that we look through the glasses of handcraft at architecture. I think Maria looks at landscapes through the glasses or through the filter of craft.
Doing it ourselves.
Most doing it to understand what we are doing. It is not computer work at all, but it is very hands-on. Concentrated on hands-on thinking, the intelligence of the hand, we call it. Looking back, I want to say that I think there's not another family in Vienna around that has such a list of reckless design. I think our parents and forefathers made so many designs. We have 4,500 in our archive. Now there are most of them, many of them are in the MAC for the exhibition.
And I think this is a good kind of connection to you've already shared so much about how your lives are immersed in this kind of natural continuation and commitment to the family legacy. But if you can each almost summarize for us, maybe in a sentence, what is it that is really the root of what motivates you to continue each day, in a day in the workshop, in a day in your creative practice, the motivation to continue this legacy is what, as you see the collection kind of stay within the tradition, but also grow into the future. What are some of those motivations for each of you?
For me, the most important thing is developing the next stage, developing new products. Zeitgeist, the word is not very
the spirit of our time.
The zeitgeist, you know zeitgeist, the
Yes,
word
of course, but
zeitgeist.
I would love to use spirit of our time more than zeitgeist.
That's better.
Well, the zeitgeist is not such a bad idea, because if you look at fashion, the zeitgeist is around, and it's a geist, which is not more, it's a ghost. It's in German, you have two different meanings of the word. It is the spirit, but it's also a ghost that's flying around. And I think that designing, and this was in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and until today, the same thing is you catch something in the air that's floating around, and it takes sometimes 10, 20 years to be acknowledged by your customers, because you have it on in your collection, a piece you designed in the 80s, for example, and today, 40 years later, it is acknowledged by our customers, and they ask for it, they want to have it. But the idea is 40 years old. And this is something very interesting concerning the workshop, that our grandfather, when he started off, he was 25 years old when his father has passed. And his mother was very much supporting his work on the one hand. On the other hand, she was warning him all the time that he should not be too risky when designing things. He should adapt to the market, if there has been something like a market then. His father, he made these Vienna bronzes, and the time of the Vienna bronzes was ending in the 1930s, more or less. And our grandfather, he acquired new forms and ideas, the zeitgeist of the Bauhaus, for example, and only in details, not really. He did not make Bauhaus design, because one thing has to be said, that the Bauhaus design, we today think like Buchraumöbel, the tube chairs,
Tubular chairs,
the
yes.
tubular chairs, for example.
Like
He never
Barcelona
did things. Never did things like that. But he was very craft orientated, which the Weimar Bauhaus was in the first place. Johannes Itten and also Gropius and the other masters, they were very orientated in the craft sense, because they did not have an orientation after architecture, because they didn't have a class for architecture then. Only in Dessau later on. But he was only, our grandfather was there for 1.5 years, and orientated more or less, I think, a very important thing was Johannes Itten, with his concept of spiritualism and colors and what have you. But he came back to Vienna into a much rougher atmosphere than Weimar was at that time. It was after the war, there was no material to work with, no customers, nobody who could afford pieces like that made by hand. So he looked around, and one of his friends advised to touch the market in the USA. And this was in the middle end of the 1920s, that he started to build up contacts with the New York market. And I think that Tante Valerie, Aunt Valerie Gallet, helped him a lot to build up contacts in the States.
We really like to use the occasion to state that her influence and her contribution is unbelievable. The more we did research, we found out she really gave some incentive to the business.
So naturally, Valerie, your great aunt Valerie Auböck Gallet has come up by now, and of course the exhibition at Touchstone is focused largely on her collection and her lifetime when she arrived in the United States in 1939 and settled in Uniontown, which will be about 10 or 12 miles from Touchstone, where our audience is. And then her and her husband, Louis Gallet, established the Gallet Mills knitting factory. So as we understand, she maintained a close relationship with the family in Vienna after World War II, and inherited this incredible collection of Aubock family heirlooms over time, which make it a very unique collection, which is kind of distinct from the collections on the market out there. So would each of you just continue a little bit and share some stories or memories or insights about Valerie's kind of contribution to the Aubock family story?
Of course, I like to speak about Valerie, our grand-aunt, that when we met her, was an eager businesswoman, a very solution-oriented lady. And by reading her letters, the exchange of letters and the life story of the grandmother, we understand that already in Vienna, she was a rather talented woman, a hat maker. So she was in the field of fashion. And her older sister, Elizabeth, called Lilly, was a graphic designer who was teaming up with very well-known Austrian designers for creating posters and documentation catalogs for fashion world. Yeah. So Valerie, she was in the stream of the fashion world. When they left for Paris, she obviously even sent French textiles to her older sister to create fashion from France in Vienna. So they even worked together, cooperated in that sense. Our father, he had the chance and he wanted to learn French because it was a vision to, after school, visit her in France. There are some letters out of that. Our great-grandmother, the mother of Valerie, even visited World Exhibition in Paris 1937. Must have been a great trip with her daughter and her son-in-law. So we think there is some influence on the production lines by French design through Valerie. And when in last chance, Louis Gallet managed to reach the United States, his wife, Valerie, supported the trip, and as we are told, was a big chance because our great-grandfather was a Quaker in United States, so there was a chance of support by the Quaker community. To get the affidavit, it was Bernhard Altmann, one has to say. It was really great that they managed to reach United States, New York City. And then there is some letter exchange, this or that shop, you should go there. Please, can you make some business for us, contacts? So Valerie, even in the first years in New York and later out of Uniontown, she even supported the Viennese family by creating business contacts. And in the heavy years of the war, she even supported sending coffee, cigarette, food. So she was really very down to earth. And we, of course, have met her only late in life, but we liked and joked with her a lot.
And what I think from the point of view of collecting, it was a collection that I think is one time in this world, because she was the sister of Carl Auböck II, and she collected and got gifts from her brother in how do you call it, as a thank for sending food over to Austria, and also purchasing pieces when coming to Vienna. And so she supported also the business here over many, and it was the only collection that was built up in the family. The special thing concerning the Gallet collection is that it is a very personal, familiar collection, and some of the pieces are really rare. For example, the ones that are hung to the walls that are brass pieces with a enamel center. And the enamel center was made by friends of our parents who ran an enamel business at that time, a very young lady. And they were friends for many years. And they are only existing, I think these pieces Valerie purchased or got as a gift. So
They are very rare.
They are very rare.
Also the dog, the Windhund, the greyhound.
Of course,
the greyhound, yeah.
The greyhound
really great.
and the bicyclist, the motorcyclist.
Yes.
What would you all say are your favorite pieces in Valerie's collection? I think there's over 300 some pieces that are in Valerie Gallet's collection. Do you each have a favorite? You mentioned the greyhound and the cyclist, but do you have favorites?
These are very rare pieces, and I don't see anybody who has a second piece of these. Maybe there were only one-off in production.
I have a special piece I like to show to you. We call it the Optimist. I hope you can see the sculpture here. And so sometimes is reclining and is a like thoughtful person, and here is optimistic looking into future. And in fact, I found the object on the shelf of Aunt Valerie. We did not have it in Vienna any longer. The original got lost. So I took it along. She gave me honor. I'm really honored that she gave it to me. And we made a cast in Vienna, and now it's in the production line again. So this is, I think, for our workshop, one of the greatest items we have.
Incredible.
So that, Maria, would you call that your favorite?
Yes.
Fantastic.
It is the logo of our workshop.
By now, my brother, he even made a business card and all.
It's on it.
On it.
It's wonderful.
It looks familiar.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So as visitors to the exhibition explore it and see all the wonderful pieces, they're going to experience different materials. You mentioned working with enamel and metal. You know, there's also leather, natural materials, glass, stone, along with metal. Can you speak a little bit about how these diverse mediums kind of came into the production and how the workshop worked with the different materials to create the objects?
I think it is rather easy because at the time when it was introduced, which was not until at the end of the 1930s, there were trades around that are not around anymore, like the caning and the bamboo production. The bamboo production, for example, was the material was sold by a Bulgarian friend of my grandmother, who was from Bulgaria, and he still has this business around the corner of our workshop. And they found out that it is cheap material, but very tough material. Bamboo is very tough. And so they thought of making products out of a material that is not very expensive. And also the trade of the caning was at that time made by blind people working after the war. They were blinded in the First World War, and they had to work something. So they were masters of the caning technique. So they tried to cooperate with people like that. Same goes for horn. Horn was not very popular, or skin, raw hide. They worked into vessels and cups and very strange materials you do not find today. You do not have anybody who can do it anymore. But in an archive and in the exhibition in the MARC, you see pieces like that.
I'm thinking in addition to the diverse materials, there's diverse forms. You know, many of them are abstract or sculptural, but one that we see repeated is the hand, which you brought up, the literally the hand being such an important just presence in, of course, your work and kind of ethos. But can you discuss a little bit the you know, frequency that has a place in the Aubock catalog and portfolio, and a bit about the meaning and thinking behind that?
I cannot tell you the meaning, but the painting behind yourself in we see here, it was made by hand. So the hand is the center of production out of your brain, out of your heart. It comes on paper through your hand. So the hand is something magic, something very holy for artists. If you look at photos of Schiele, for example, Egon Schiele, you know, yes, he always makes figures with his hands, and he plays with his hands. The hand is something very important together with your face, with your expressions. It's the mudra in India. You express language with your hands. And so I think the earliest hand we have in our collection is 1928. It's a book rest that's mounted on a slab of brass. And it has something very Buddhist in its expression. The Buddhist hand is one of the most important symbols for peace and balance in life. Also dynamics in life, of course.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about the exhibition that's celebrating the 100 years of your father. That's happening in Vienna, and I believe there was a stamp commission, a stamp that was a commemorative stamp made, and on that stamp is the model 2060 flatware.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how that whole commemorative stamp project came to be?
Of course, I just like to say that in European countries, stamp collecting is a culture sport to the people. So in each country, they have issuing of stamps on certain theme-oriented issues. And so for the last 7-8 years in our country, Austria, there is an issue on industrial design. So I walked up to the guys in charge of the Austrian stamp company and said, well, how about Carl Auböck 100th birthday? And they were so generous to say, hey, great idea, yeah. We had to present to a jury. This is a very high-class event to present and to be selected, and some people from the museums were present, and the a woman in charge of the university, our father was professor, so they said, great, do it. And then one of the students from University of Applied Arts, she's specializing in the stamp layout, the graphic design. She designed this gray little elegant stamp, and it's now issued in 150,000. So that's quite a large issue, huh?
Sure. Yeah, and how did you land on that particular product for the stamp?
Oh, this is speaking between us, my brother and myself. We tried to analyze the key works of our father. And we had some ideas which object, which product would be useful. Now, to understand this was done, the Cutlery 2060 was done by a young man,
30 years old.
30 years old, and it won the gold medal at World Exhibition of Brussels. So we thought it's for the upcoming Austria, country of Austria in a revival time, a very good example of a new aesthetics.
What a special project and contribution. I just want to take a moment to touch on some of the other mediums that are in the Auböck Gallet exhibition here at Touchstone, beyond the designed objects from the workshop and Valerie's collection. Your grandfather, Carl II, a number of his painted canvases are on view, as well as material related to the modern architecture of Carl III. So again, kind of underscoring the how the family has kind of traversed mediums in their practice, and the two of you continue to do. But can you just talk a little bit about Carl II's work as an artist, and maybe if there's paintings in that medium you want to touch on?
Thank you. Thank you for suggesting. It's really outstanding that due to the family structure, Carl II was parallel to working in the workshop, studying graphic design with his older sister at the very well-known School of Graphic and Illustration in Vienna. It is a quite important school for well-designed.
As a very young man, he was about
14 years old.
14, 16 years old.
When he was 16, they enrolled him at the Academy of Fine Arts, and in the memory of his mother is written that young Carl thought himself to be a genius painter. Unfortunately, there were some mistake conversations with gallerists, and he decided never to sell paintings. I read in the letters that his mother tried to sell his paintings, which were very well sought for, but young Carl was, again by his parents, brought to the private school of Johannes Itten, and Johannes Itten immediately
Which
realized...
was in Vienna. It was located at that time in Vienna in the 19th district, and it was more or less a point where society gathered and collectors gathered, because they knew Johannes Itten was up to something new.
Very unusual teacher.
Yes, unusual
So
teacher.
this Mr. Itten, he asked 17 Austrian pupils, students, join me at the Bauhaus in Weimar. And our grandfather wanted to join him, didn't have enough of money. So there is a letter of Mr. Itten to Mr. Gropius. There is this young bronze worker, Carl Auböck. Could you give him some place to stay? And they got like a scholarship. They got two guys, yeah. They got a studio which they didn't have to pay for. Yeah, this was like a scholarship to have a studio for free. And we have some stories from these few years in Weimar. Obviously, they really were out of money all the time, yeah. But it was actually forming the standard, because they could see, they could learn, they could exchange in an international group of students. So just imagine graphic education, private school, Academy of Fine Arts, and Weimar. So it's 4 schools. And that's really quite unusual for a painting career. So during his life, he used to paint in the afternoons, in the evenings, on the weekends. It was his life.
Yeah, so you were speaking about your grandfather, Carl II, and his career, or starting out as an interest in painting. So, that I'm sure influenced your father, Carl III's career as an architect. And after a visit to the United States in the 1950s, where he was meeting with Walter Gropius, Benjamin Thompson, Herbert Baer, George Nelson, Charles and Ray Eames, he designed his first house here in Uniontown for Aunt Valerie and Uncle Louis in 1953. So can you talk a little bit about that whole story, how the house came to be, and then his career as an architect?
I just like to suggest, I did some research at the Gropius archive and some research at the Herbert Bayer estate, and it turned out that Aunt Valerie Gallet was the one to call up Mr. Gropius whether he has work for an Austrian chap, whether her nephew Carl couldn't come up to Boston and work in the Gropius studio. There is some letter, Gropius suggesting Carl Auböck should emigrate and should come to the United States for good. In the end, it turned out to be a Fulbright scholarship on prefabrication. And now I like to return to the house design. It's really worth it to understand that there is a careful letter exchange, even how to style the furniture, which color the curtains should have, how the kitchen was done. They would do it by letter exchange. Meanwhile, our mother, Justina, before they got married, had some obligation in the south of United States. She was in the Midwest,
Minnesota.
and there is some note, Justina will bring some plants along. So she took even on both.
The plants.
Yes, she
Yes.
brought. So there
Yes.
was some exchange in the family matter, yeah.
Oh, that's a great story. Yeah.
And the house in Uniontown was charming. Looking at the photos, you see it was all in the spirit of that time.
Absolutely is. Yeah.
Ken shared with us, Maria, that there was a photo of you in the archives, of course, as a young, very young girl, but with your father looking, as he's looking over the drawings of the Gallet residence. So just as a practicing, landscape designer, do you think that those moments, had kind of touched your life and your path and continue to, obviously they've had an influence on your practice, but anything more you want to share about exposure to architecture at a young age, and how that has.
As we said in the beginning of our conversation, the professional field was mixed with the family life. And I was aware as a small child that drawing plants is some important job to do. However, I have to say, sometimes I think, when do you start remembering memories? Is it 2 years, 3 years, maybe a 4-year-old child can remember? And I'm fully aware that I was joining the parents visiting building sites, and I tried to be very well educated and said,
Affirmative.
yes, I tried to say, well, this is for the industrial site. And they started to giggle because it was a housing site. So little Maria wanted to be part of the team. In a way, I tried to say that further on and later on, while studying architecture, I realized that the production has changed enormously. And now the field of architecture in the industrial field has quite an impact on our environment. And in time of climate change, I think that the profession needs some more urgency solutions for the building business. And I try in my, let's call it,
Sphere.
I try in my sphere to bring solutions to our region that are more applicable to the environment. Yes.
At his time, when my father worked, and I worked for him for 17, 18 years or so, ecological backgrounds or details didn't have any importance. It was all about form. It was all about details. Every detail of doors and windows had to be designed. Today, you cannot, if you have an architect, maybe in the States, but in Austria, nobody thinks of detailing. Drawing up details of windows and doors and entrances nobody does it anymore. It's
And speaking of details and ahead of its time, I think it's time to talk about a Fallingwater connection.
Yes, yeah. So Carl, you visited with your father and with your uncle to Fallingwater, I understand.
yes,
So at
but
least on two
my sister,
occasions.
she also
Yeah, I
Jim,
will tell you
I-
them later.
I
Oh, tell
visited
me about
in-
the visits, yeah, and tell me about those visits and the impressions they made on you.
I will never forget the first time when I came into the living room of the Fallingwater house, and you hear the water and you see the space that is very low and it's going downstairs, and the colors, of course. And he was guiding us. Mr. Kaufmann was guiding the group. It was a large group. It was about, I think, 12, 15 people, and all architects and designers from the ICSID organization. And yes, he has
Great experience.
It was
Yeah,
a
fantastic
Story.
The second time I was there 75, and it also is an interesting thing because I was there with a friend, a school friend, and Roger took us there and showed us through. So 5 years later, it was then New York.
Well, my story
So,
is quite parallel to this. Unfortunately, I have no memory of Edgar Kaufmann, but I have a very strong memory on the Asian impact of work of Frank Lloyd Wright. For being educated in Vienna in architecture history, Frank Lloyd Wright was really far out. And there's a story from the Academy of Fine Art. Teacher Otto Wagner in 1900 turned up with a book of Frank Lloyd Wright from Berlin, the Wachsmuth book, and saying there is one man in this world who's doing it better. He can do more. He was a very critical teacher, Otto Wagner. Yeah? So he gave to his students this. Until today, the story is very well known in our city. Frank Lloyd Wright being a really far out visionary guy. And myself visiting the Fallingwater, I had this feeling about Asia. I had the impression there is an American Asian draw to it. And later on, of course, being in landscape architecture, I still think the location is so fascinating. I had a chance again that Roger took me on a drive, car lover. He really liked to go for an outing. And we had the chance, so I just tried this to show you. These are the slides I bought back then. And I
I'd
will
love
be
to see those.
happy
Yeah.
if you're interested to send them over. The coda colors are all a bit worn. It's all rather brownish, reddish. But I have to say the slides I did myself are in mint condition till today. And it's really a wonderful impression of a summer day at the site.
I
And
can't
for
wait to
this,
see them. Yeah,
I will do so.
wonderful. And I did have one other question about Edgar Kaufmann Jr. So people that are seeing the exhibition may not know, but Edgar Kaufmann Jr. worked at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and headed up their Good Design program from 1950 to 1955. And I know several times Aubock was represented in the Good Design shows. Do you know if that helped at all with the American marketplace or with the career of the workshop at all?
I'm sure.
We are very proud to tell you that there is a cocktail shaker in the MoMA collection.
Which is from that time.
Which is exactly from the time,
54.
and it's on show in the design exhibition.
Oh, fantastic.
And we are so proud to tell you that today, this is magic, but today we received a thank you letter from the curator from MoMA for donating the little booklet on 100 years of our father. So it's like our conversation and
A
this letter
continuation,
from MoMA.
yes.
It's really good. Yeah. I believe that Edgar Kaufmann was very influential to spreading the word on design. And concerning the exit contacts, there are some letters from our father suggesting Edgar Kaufmann participating. I would have to offer you, can send you some scans of letter exchange, but there aren't many around, but if I find some, I can send them to you.
Thank you for that.
Wonderful.
So, and Maria and Carl, I unfortunately have to leave you all. I think maybe Brittany might continue the conversation for a little bit longer, but what a pleasure to speak with you both and to see you both on the screen. And I hope you will come back to Fallingwater for a third time.
Thank you.
We'd love to see you again.
Thank you. It was
Thank you
great
very much.
meeting you, and thank you for good questions, good conversation.
A wonderful conversation. So thank you.
We haven't spoken a lot on the female side of the Auböck family, but I just like to state for the final minutes that it was just made possible by support from the great-grandmother to Valerie Gallet to our grandmother Mara Uchkunova, that this workshop consistently was able to produce.
And our mother, of course, who opened it to the international markets, because it was not that international orientated before. There were a few shops in New York City and in the States and in England that were interested in our product. But our mother, she opened the workshop on the trade fairs in the 1950s. Starting from the late 1950s, she attended the important trade fairs 3 times a year, 4 times a year, and so opened a large market for the workshop at that time.
I see. Yeah, Maria, we of course spoke of Valerie, and a bit you shared about Lilly and her kind of pioneering in the graphic design field toward the beginning of our conversation, but I'm so glad you revisited to emphasize the importance of women in the kind of building of the family workshop and how they contributed each in their own way, and now yourself and Zola, etc. So
yeah.
And yes, we look forward to sharing this conversation with the family that can be there in person and with the audience at Touchstone Crafts in Pennsylvania in just a few weeks. So thank you so much for your time. And you will be there in spirit, and we will certainly again be sharing this conversation. And it's been such inspiring insight, very inspiring for me personally too. So thank you both.
Thank you.
I really want to thank Louis and Mariel and the whole Marjorie family of Gallet to make it possible that Ken Grieb made this show work, and your intense help and support is great for us. It's really like a family reunion.